It was supposed to be one perfect summer day. More than 1,300 people, the vast majority of them women and children from a single church congregation, boarded a chartered steamboat for their annual picnic on Long Island Sound. Just 20 minutes after the first sign of trouble, it would become the deadliest single-day disaster in New York City's entire history, a record the city would hold for the next 97 years, until September 11th, 2001. The date was June 15th, 1904. The congregation belonged to St. Mark's Evangelical Lutheran Church in the heart of Manhattan's Little Germany. Kleindeutschland, one of the largest and most tightly knit German immigrant communities in America, home to more than 50,000 people. Every June, the church chartered a steamboat for its Sunday school picnic. This year, for the 17th time, they hired a paddle steamer called the General Slocum. Nearly every passenger aboard was a woman or a child, dressed in their finest summer clothes, long dresses, straw hats, their Sunday best. A band played on deck. Children raced between the benches, while their mothers unpacked picnic baskets meant for a beach on Long Island, still hours away. As the boat pulled out into the East River that morning, no one had any reason to expect anything but a beautiful day. Below deck, in a cramped forward compartment used to store lamp oil, paint, and bundles of packing straw for the day's activities, something ignited. Investigators later believed the cause was almost absurdly small: a carelessly discarded match landing in a pile of hay in a room stacked floor to ceiling with exactly the wrong materials to contain it. By the time a deckhand first caught the smell of smoke, the fire already had a real hold below deck. Crew members ran for the fire hoses mounted along the ship's railings. And the moment they turned the water on, the canvas hoses simply burst apart in their hands, rotted through after years of sitting untouched and untested. No fire drill had ever once been run aboard the General Slocum, despite the law requiring them. As flame and thick black smoke rolled across the lower deck, the untrained crew had no plan and no practice to fall back on. And panic began spreading through more than 1,000 trapped passengers, even faster than the fire itself. At the helm, Captain William Van Shake made his call. The nearest shore and safety sat close by on either side of the river. Instead, he held course, pushing the burning ship forward toward North Brother Island, more than a mile further upriver, still fully loaded with over 1,000 terrified passengers. The ship's own speed did the rest of the damage. Wind tore straight through the open decks, and within minutes, a contained fire below decks became a wall of flame, consuming almost the entire vessel. Passengers scrambled for the life preservers, hanging exactly where they were supposed to be, mounted along the railings and overhead racks. Mothers grabbed them first for their children, strapping the canvas vests on as tightly as they could, certain in that moment that they were doing everything right to keep their families safe. Then the life preservers began to fail, one after another. Survivors later described them crumbling apart the instant they hit the water, disintegrating into loose fibers. Others said the vests seemed to actively drag the wearer straight under the surface, instead of holding them up at all. With the deck growing unbearably hot and no time left to wait, mothers began lifting their own children over the railings, lowering them by the arms into the East River below, praying that someone, anyone, in the water could catch them before the current pulled them away. Others jumped in themselves, with no other choice left. Heavy Victorian-era dresses, layered with petticoats and corsets, soaked through in seconds and turned instantly to dead weight, pulling under even the passengers who actually knew how to swim. Crew members ran to lower the lifeboats and found they simply wouldn't move. The boats had been wired and painted fast to their davits for years, never once tested, never actually meant to be lowered in a real emergency. The General Slocum finally ran aground at North Brother Island. From the very first spark to the ship coming to rest, less than 15 minutes had passed. By the time she stopped moving, there was almost nothing left of her, and hundreds of passengers were already gone. Rescue boats, tugboats, and nearby residents worked for hours afterward, pulling bodies from the East River. On North Brother Island itself, staff at a nearby hospital turned the lawn in front of their building into a makeshift morgue, laid out row after row. When the final count came in, 1,021 of the roughly 1,342 people who had boarded that steamboat that morning were dead. It remained the deadliest single-day disaster in New York City's history for the next 97 years, a record that would not be broken until September 11th, 2001. Every single safety measure on that ship had failed within the same 20 minutes. The hoses, the lifeboats, the life preservers, even the course the captain chose to steer. When investigators finally opened their inquiry, they wanted to know exactly how and exactly who was responsible. Investigators opened their inquiry almost immediately, working to understand how a routine picnic cruise had become the deadliest disaster in the city's history. What they found was not one failure, but years of them, stacked on top of each other. The fire hoses that burst apart the moment they were used had never once been tested in the General Slocum's 13 years of service. They had simply been left in place, rotting year after year through every single safety inspection. The lifeboats that wouldn't lower had been wired and painted directly onto their davits, not as an emergency measure, but as a permanent fixture, apparently for as long as anyone on the crew could remember. The failed life preservers told the most damning story of all. When investigators cut them open, they found the cork inside had rotted into dust, after 13 years exposed to sun and weather. To hide the missing weight and pass legal inspection anyway, the manufacturer had packed the vests with solid iron bars, hidden inside the canvas, bars that may have helped drag people under instead of holding them up. That manufacturer was the Nonpareil Cork Works of Camden, New Jersey. Its manager and 3 employees were indicted for knowingly selling the fraudulent life preservers used aboard the General Slocum and dozens of other vessels. And just 1 month before the disaster, a federal steamboat inspector named Henry Lundberg had personally certified the General Slocum as safe, including her fire equipment and her life preservers. One more detail came out during the investigation. Witnesses said Captain Van Schaik had refused to steer for the nearer shore because he was afraid of setting fire to oil storage tanks and lumber yards along the riverbank, reportedly out of concern for the company's own property and insurance liability, not just for his passengers' safety. With rotted hoses, sealed lifeboats, fraudulent life preservers, a rubber-stamped inspection, and a captain's own choice, all laid out on the record, surely someone would finally be held responsible. Only one person was ever put on trial, Captain William Van Schaik. In January 1906, nearly 2 years after the disaster, he was convicted of criminal negligence and sentenced to 10 years in Sing Sing prison. No one else was ever convicted of anything. Not the steamboat inspector who had signed off on the ship a month before, not a single officer of the Knickerbocker Steamboat Company that owned her. Not the manufacturer that had packed life preservers with iron bars to pass inspection. The captain stood alone. Van Schaik's wife, Grace, refused to accept the sentence. She campaigned relentlessly for his release and gathered more than 200,000 signatures on a petition for his pardon. President Theodore Roosevelt reviewed the case twice, and twice refused to grant it. The severity of the disaster and the scale of the loss made it politically impossible to let the sentence go. On Christmas Day 1911, the next president, William Howard Taft, signed the pardon. Van Schaik had served less than 4 years for the deaths of 1,021 people. He lived quietly on a farm until his death at 90 in 1927. The Knickerbocker Steamboat Company itself never faced any meaningful consequence at all. No executive was charged. No lasting penalty was imposed. Within a few years, the company had simply faded from public record. But the real cost of that mourning wasn't measured only in court records. Nearly every family in Little Germany had lost someone. Some mothers had boarded that ship with several children and came home with none of them at all. Within months, families who had lived in the neighborhood for generations began quietly moving away, unable to bear a community full of constant reminders. By that November, more than a quarter of the families connected to victims had already left the Lower East Side for good. German social clubs disbanded. German-language businesses closed their doors. A community of more than 50,000 people, one of the largest immigrant neighborhoods in American history, effectively dissolved within a single year, not because of poverty or war, but because of grief. Today, almost nothing remains to mark where Little Germany once stood. The neighborhood is known as the East Village now. The only real memorial is a small marble fountain in Tompkins Square Park, a quiet monument to a community that vanished in the space of a single afternoon. One captain served 4 years for the deaths of 1,021 people. Everyone else involved walked away untouched. Follow for more of history's buried disasters and the accountability that never came.